Café Boulud has been a beloved New York City fine dining spot for decades, but it unfortunately closed in 2021. Thankfully, the legendary chef Daniel Boulud reopened the establishment to great acclaim and a Michelin Star. The restaurant serves beautiful and traditional French food, but also food from throughout the world, so I just had to give it a try.
Today, it's a beautiful but very cold and windy day here in New York City. Right now I'm along the outskirts of Central Park, but I simply cannot wait until later because one, I'm going to a restaurant where I'm sure it will be a hell of a lot warmer than it is right now, and two, I'm going to a restaurant. But I'm not going to just any restaurant. I'll be going to a Michelin starred restaurant. I'll be going to Café Boulud. Café Boulud is the product of the legendary French chef Daniel Boulud, and it has been around a while, but it did close for a period and now it's back and seemingly better than ever. In fact, the Michelin Guide made their Michelin Star announcements just a few days ago for New York, and Café Boulud was one of the newly starred restaurants. That's pretty much what put Café Boulud back on my radar. I always knew about the restaurant, I always wanted to go there, but with the star announcements, it got me looking at Café Boulud's menu and wow, that's a pretty damn good menu. And then I checked out the restaurant's Instagram, and my goodness, the pictures of their food look like absolute works of art. Just stunning. So I thought, you know what, since I wanted to go to at least one more Michelin starred restaurant before the year was over, Café Boulud looked like the perfect place. So with that being said, let's go to dinner at Café Boulud.
The original Café Boulud opened in 1998 on the Upper East Side of New York City. The restaurant is the product of one of the most decorated chefs in the country, Daniel Boulud. Boulud has been a pillar in the New York City fine dining scene for decades, from serving as the executive chef at the acclaimed Le Cirque to the opening of his namesake restaurant Daniel, which at one time had 3 Michelin stars. Since Michelin's debut in New York City with the 2006 guide, Café Boulud maintained a Michelin star up until 2020 when it lost it. Unfortunately, things only got worse. With the pandemic, the restaurant was forced to close. It took a while for the restaurant to reopen, since new owners took over the hotel where the original Café Boulud was located and had different ideas of what they wanted in the restaurant. As a result, Café Boulud moved to a new location a bit further south and reopened at the end of 2023 to positive reviews. I arrived right as the restaurant opened for dinner service at 5. Café Boulud is housed in a very nice looking space. In fact, compared to the photos of the original restaurant, the new location certainly seems to be an improvement. The restaurant is nicely lit with classical architectural touches, but there are modern elements to the design as well, such as the artwork on the walls. Overall, I appreciated the look of Café Boulud's dining room. It's certainly a nice place for a meal, although there was a sense of formality at the restaurant which permeated the atmosphere, but it was never so much that I felt awkward or uncomfortable. At the end of the day, Café Boulud is a fine dining establishment, and one would be able to sense that without even looking at the menu. And speaking of the menu, I began to explore its offerings. The menu is pretty interesting and unique. It's divided into 4 main parts. One section offers traditional French classics, another showcases seasonal specialties, the third provides a series of vegetarian courses, but the fourth may be the most fascinating. It's called Le Voyage, and it's a rotating menu that showcases a specific cuisine from throughout the world. My server said that section of the menu changes about every 9 months. Currently, the Le Voyage selection focused on the cuisine of Brazil and had some intriguing offerings. There were also other courses and sides that didn't really fit into the 4 categories, including a delicious sounding pomme de terre royale with Kaluga caviar. Next, I browsed the beverage offerings. As expected, Café Boulud has a wide variety of bottles of French wine, but I opted for wine by the glass. I chose a glass of the 2023 Chateau de Jasson Côte de Provence Blanc. It's also labeled as a Cuvée Maison Barnes, which, considering that's the name of the restaurant next to Café Boulud, which Daniel Boulud is also involved with, I thought that it was an appropriate wine to order. The wine was decent, although it wasn't my favorite. I usually prefer something with a bit more body and impact, and that wine was very light. I've gotta admit, when I was looking for a beverage, I was more so looking at the price. December was an expensive month for me, and I thought that I could save a few bucks by going with one of the lower priced options. The reality is, I should have just stuck with water. I would have saved far more, and frankly, my wine tasted like water with a slight white wine flavor. Still, it's always a treat to have a glass of wine, and I was grateful for it even though it wasn't my favorite. First up, I was presented with a canapé to start the meal. The little bite contained artichoke, spinach, and was topped with a sliver of Parmesan cheese. It was very nice. It had good flavor and texture, and overall, it was a delightful start to my dinner. Next, I was presented with a bread basket, which contained 2 different types of bread as well as a quenelle of butter. I knew pretty quickly that that bread was gonna be good. When I picked up one of the mini baguettes, I could feel the heat, and when I split it in half, steam rose from the bread. I was really excited about it, but before I could try it, I was presented with my appetizer.
Oh, excellent.
It's your scallops with sorrel puree and white wine sauce.
Excellent. That's wonderful.
Enjoy, please.
Thank you so much.
I didn't want my appetizer to get cold, so I quickly took a bite of the mini baguette, and as expected, it was wonderful. The bread had spot-on flavor and a satisfying, crispy exterior. It was excellent. The other style of bread was just as tasty and just as pleasing. In regards to the butter, it was delightful as well. Throughout my dinner, I devoured that entire bread basket, not only since it was so good, but also because the portion sizes of the dishes I got weren't very large. For my first course, I went with the pan-seared scallops with sorrel and black tea coulis, hearts of palm, turnips, and autumn plum. Like I said, the portions weren't very sizable, but my goodness, that was a beautiful dish. It was a modern and elegant work of edible art. My first bite was simply wonderful. The scallops were perfectly cooked and texturally on point. That beautiful green sauce was lovely. It elevated the scallops to a whole other level. The other components on the plate were a joy to eat as well and complemented the scallops nicely. Everything was just wonderful. Overall, I loved that plate of food. It tasted as good as it looked, although it would have been nice if it were larger, but Café Boulud, after all, is a fine dining restaurant and one shouldn't expect the largest offerings. Nevertheless, the scallops were a true pleasure to eat. Next up was my main course, the bar en poupillette sauce mirette.
Puree and red wine sauce.
Beautiful.
That's what I want.
The dish consisted of a black sea bass wrapped in crispy potatoes. There was also a leek fondue, a potato puree, and a red wine sauce. It was a decent looking dish, but I've gotta admit, compared to my first course and the other plates I saw on Café Boulud's Instagram, it lacked a bit of flair. At the same time, I was hyped to try it. I thought that it was nice, however, I've gotta be honest, I felt like it lacked a bit of seasoning. Now, there's no denying the fact that it was an enjoyable plate of food, but I just thought that it could have been a bit better. At the same time, the sea bass was cooked well, and I absolutely loved the red wine sauce, which had a wonderful flavor. The potato puree was delicious, and I liked the crispy potato wrapped around the fish. Although it wasn't the easiest to get a clean bite with the sea bass and its potato skin. As a whole, it's still a nice dish, even though I felt there was room for improvement. One of my main reasons for ordering the course was its history. The dish was actually a creation that Daniel Boulud introduced during his time at Le Cirque, which was one of the most influential and important restaurants in New York City's history. Daniel Boulud even brought the dish to his namesake restaurant Daniel, where it remained a menu favorite for years. Eventually, the dish made its way to Café Boulud. For me, it was a joy to consume a course with such an impressive culinary lineage. I would have loved to have gone to the original New York City location of Le Cirque, but sadly the restaurant closed in 2018. At least I was able to try such a notable dish from the establishment, even though that very course has evolved a bit over the years. To sum it up, the dish wasn't perfect, but it was still pleasant, and its historical ties were something that I really appreciated. After finishing the sea bass, it was on to dessert. Just like the main menu, the dessert selection was divided into the same 4 sections, but there were also some special offerings like a variety of ice cream flavors and cheese. Frankly, everything sounded incredible, and deciding what to order wasn't easy. Ultimately, I continued with the French theme of my meal by getting a true French classic, the tarte tatin. Café Boulud's version consisted of Calvados roasted apples, puff pastry, and smoked vanilla ice cream. The dish looked to be spot on, and the touch of gold leaf added a bit of elegance. A tarte tatin is basically an inverted tart consisting of caramelized apples and pastry. The dessert was created in the 1880s by the Tatin sisters, Stephanie and Caroline, who served it as their signature dish at their hotel. I thought that Café Boulud's version was absolutely perfect on every single level. Compared to the examples of the dish that I've had in the past, the offering before me blew them all away. The apples had a brilliant taste, the pastry was rich and buttery, and the ice cream was magical. While it was vanilla, the amount of smoke the restaurant was able to get into it was remarkable. Simply put, the ice cream paired perfectly with the tart. Overall, that dessert was an incredible ending to a fine dinner. I just wish that it was a bit larger, but it is what it is. After finishing the tart, I had one more bite to enjoy. I was presented with a nice little creation of a vanilla crémeux with quince, spices, and orange zest fashioned in a brown sugar sablé. It was certainly a flavor-packed bite and a nice little bonus to my dinner. After finishing, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $140.45, but with my tip, I spent just over $168. It certainly was costly, and the portions weren't very large, but it's the type of restaurant where you sort of expect that. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed my time at Café Boulud.
So I just finished with my dinner at Café Boulud. That was a very delightful meal. I enjoyed all the food I had. It was delicious. The highlight for me were the scallops. That was just such a beautiful dish. It was so tasty. The flavors on there were just so delightful. Although it is a close call, that tart for dessert was just wonderful. Although I do wish it was larger, but you know, I could say the same thing for pretty much every course I had there. It wasn't the most filling meal, but it was certainly a good meal. I really like Café Boulud's menu. I mean, you got all the classic French dishes though, but the flavors from around the world, now that was interesting. I mean, I kind of wish that I would have tried one of those courses, especially since now the cuisine the country's exploring is Brazilian, and you know, I don't think I've really had elevated Brazilian cuisine, especially at a Michelin Star level. Nevertheless, like I said, I still really enjoyed every single dish that I've had, although maybe in hindsight I would switch the main course only because it wasn't necessarily the most exciting dish, and some of the other options on the menu seemed just to have a little more pizzazz. But I still enjoyed the dish, and it felt sort of special to have something with a bit of history behind it. Overall, I really liked Café Boulud. The food was delicious, it's a beautiful dining room, the restaurant had great service, and I really appreciated the sort of flavors from around the world. It definitely gives the establishment a sense of uniqueness. In summation, I had a great dinner tonight at Café Boulud, although it was a costly one, and I'll definitely have to cut back on the fine dining come January. Nevertheless, I certainly enjoyed myself this evening, and I can't wait to return to Café Boulud.